When Virtua Racing first appeared in the arcades in 1992, it would quickly go on to change the landscape of how we saw, played and witnessed the realm of video games from that point on. It also set the course for development teams as to where things were going to go next, because it wouldn't be too long after the release of the game when we would start to see a massive trend with various add-ons for even consoles and even newer consoles coming out that were able to handle all of these new 3D aesthetics and capabilities. And Virtua Racing was definitely one of the earliest games to really hit that height of success worldwide, so much in a way that it would gain multiple ports to a variety of systems during that time, with one of the most impressive ports coming in the form of the 16-bit entry on the Sega Mega Drive, which for the time would have been considered an unlikely format, as the Mega Drive or Genesis was never considered a platform that would have been powerful enough to even run such a game. But it had shown in previous statements with some games that were already released on the system that there was possibilities for some level of 3D elements to be integrated into games. But in saying that, in order for all of these elements on the Mega Drive edition to work, all of it would have had to have been scaled down significantly in order to get it to run properly. And believe it or not, it does, and it works really well. And in many ways it's a masterpiece in what it was able to do for that console, because that in itself really helped to hit the ground running in the terms of overall 3D development that would later follow with other systems moving forward. In order to make the game work, however, there was some elements that also needed to be added in, especially with a larger cartridge that would also cater for using a 3D processing chip that would allow the game to run smoothly. The game would include different modes from single player and even kind of like elements from the arcade, with the 3 basic tracks being able to utilise the Formula 1 car, but also would add in multiplayer features. One of the noticeable elements though that you will see is the pop-up features that was a problem with regards to games, not just here but even on later 32-bit systems with the Sega Saturn and even the PlayStation. The draw distance was something that developers had to learn to work around, as all of the development scenes would be drawn up in real time and loaded up on screen as you were moving around, so pop-up was inevitable and is definitely apparent here in the Mega Drive edition of Virtua Racing. But still, aside from that, what it does do is exceptional. It really showcased that the Mega Drive was a lot more capable of what it could do and what potential it did really have, because yes, there were later editions of the game that were added onto the extension with the 32X that would later feature for the Mega Drive also, and that would be again another upgrade of the game, adding in more features, more modes, the ability to race on different tracks aside from the base 3 tracks of the main game, but also have different vehicles, not just from the Formula 1 car but also like stock car and even prototype race cars. Plus the graphics, the sound and just the overall level of detail was somewhat significantly improved in the 32X version, and it also runs very well. Even later with the Sega Saturn, when it released, there was another port added in 1995, again expanding on the elements seen within all of these other ports, to a point that at that time it would become the most definitive edition of Virtua Racing on any system outside of the arcade, because it had all of those elements from all of those other ports that I mentioned, but again adding in even more modes, more tracks, even had like a championship style mode, and even when you look at it today it still looks great even by today's standards. And the funny thing is, a lot of modern indie racing games that you see today all use this low poly, untextured aesthetic that would have been originally seen with Virtua Racing and games like it of the time, as it does hold a nostalgic charm and still is quite usable and serviceable even in today's realm of video games. And yet again, there would be another port later on of Virtua Racing on the PlayStation 2 as part of the Sega Ages 2500 series in Japan that would essentially be a port of the Sega Saturn edition, but again would add a few extra elements into the mix and boasting even greater visuals, detail and gameplay. But even going back to the 16-bit entry on the Mega Drive, out of all of the editions, that quite possibly has to be the most impressive, considering what it was able to do. Yes, it did have to scale things down in order to get it to run on the system, but it also proved, like I said, also that the Mega Drive was a lot more capable of what it was able to do than many would have thought. And while it may not have aged particularly well in the grand scheme of things, but it still plays good. It still works almost flawlessly without any issues, and for its time it was a marvel in technical prowess and what could be achieved. And in many ways it also started the renaissance of creative ideas and the willingness to push boundaries that we would later see with future consoles, with the Sega Saturn and even the Sony PlayStation from that point on, that would generate a lot of creative endeavours and ideas. And when we look back, Virtua Racing and games like it of that period definitely helped to start that ball rolling. The game on the Mega Drive, like all of the other editions, even with the arcade, is very tricky, takes a bit of time to get used to. The first track, if you get a good run at it, yes, you will be able to complete it on a good run and potentially even win races. Now you can do it with the other two tracks, but they are a bit more tricky to get familiar with. But at the same time, it's like everything else with all of these games, patience, practice. That's what will get you over the finish line. But you will need, especially on the later two tracks, you will need a flawless run without any mistakes in order to win any of the races, because any sort of slip up or even sliding off onto the grass or hitting the wall will essentially lead you to a game over screen very, very quickly, especially on the later laps, because the time, especially in these older type games, the timing system is brutal. There is really no room for error. You have to be almost an expert at these games in order to achieve greatness in them. And honestly, this has to be one of the most challenging and difficult games that you can play, especially for this time. But it's still a legend in the realm of racing games and what it's represented, as it did help to pave the way for a lot of ideas to come after it. It really did. It's a superb game. For the Mega Drive, it's exceptional, and for its time there really was nothing else like it.